The Last Meal Illusion, Deconstructing Death Row's Culinary Rituals. A man sits in a Texas death row cell, staring at a cold tray. No lobster. No champagne. No elaborate feast. Just a cheeseburger from the prison kitchen, wrapped in paper, already going stale. Outside his cell, the warden checks his watch. In 6 hours, this man will be led down a corridor he's never walked before. But right now, the only choice he has left in this world is whether to unwrap that burger or let it sit. This is what Hollywood never shows you. This is the last meal stripped of its myth. And the truth is far more devastating than any movie could ever portray. Rewind 18 months. That same man sat in a courtroom as a jury foreman stood and delivered a single word that changed everything. Guilty. Capital murder. Death penalty. But in that moment, what invaded his thoughts wasn't the legal reality crashing down around him. It was something he'd seen in a movie years before. A condemned man ordering anything he wanted. Steak. Chocolate cake. The fantasy of culinary freedom in the final hours. That image planted itself in his mind and grew roots during the months that followed. Death row across America holds over 2,500 people. Each one arrives with the same misconception, the same celluloid delusion burned into their consciousness by decades of film and television. They imagine chefs preparing elaborate requests. They picture themselves making impossible demands that somehow get fulfilled. A final act of rebellion. A moment of autonomy in a system designed to strip away every last shred of control. The reality waiting for them is something else entirely. In Texas, where more executions occur than any other state, the budget for a last meal was set at $40 in recent years. Adjusted for inflation in 2026, that's roughly $50. $50 to summarize a human life. $50 that must cover items available from the prison commissary or local restaurants willing to deliver to a maximum security facility at odd hours. No alcohol. No tobacco. Nothing requiring special preparation the kitchen staff can't handle. Nothing that takes longer than an hour to acquire. The man in that cell had months to plan his request. He read everything he could find about famous last meals. Ted Bundy's refusal. John Wayne Gacy's fried chicken. Timothy McVeigh's ice cream. Each story felt like a roadmap, a guide to navigating the impossible. But what those stories never mentioned was the paperwork. The approval process. The dietary restrictions. The security protocols that turn every food item into a potential risk assessment. The request form arrived at his cell 6 weeks before his scheduled execution date. A single page. Blank lines where he could write his choices. Instructions at the bottom in small print. All requests subject to approval, substitutions may occur, delivery not guaranteed. He stared at those blank lines for 3 days. What do you write when every meal you've eaten for years came through a slot in a steel door? How do you summarize comfort, memory, and finality in a list that fits on half a page? His first draft requested items from his childhood. His grandmother's fried chicken recipe. The specific brand of root beer his father bought on summer Sundays. Cornbread made a certain way. He handed the form to a guard who glanced at it and shook his head before the paper even left his hand. Custom recipes weren't possible. The kitchen didn't make special preparations. Everything had to come pre-made or from approved suppliers. Start again. Second draft. Chain restaurant items. A burger from a specific place. Fries. A milkshake. Chocolate pie. This one made it past the initial review but came back 2 weeks later with modifications. The restaurant was too far away. The pie wasn't available. Would he accept substitutions? The burger could come from somewhere closer. The milkshake might be vanilla instead of chocolate. Pie would be whatever the commissary had in stock. Check the boxes to approve changes or submit a new request. What they never tell you about death row is how the waiting does something to your mind. Time stretches and compresses. Hours feel like days until suddenly weeks vanish. Some men stop eating altogether months before their date arrives. Others eat constantly, their bodies preparing for an end they can't quite process. The last meal becomes less about food and more about exerting will in a place designed to eliminate it. Even the smallest choice, vanilla instead of chocolate, transforms into an act of defiance or surrender. By the third draft, his request had simplified. Cheeseburger, fries, apple pie if available. Items so basic they couldn't be denied, so simple they required no special arrangements. The form went through. Approved. Date and time noted. He'd spend the next 4 weeks knowing exactly what would arrive on that tray, knowing it would taste nothing like freedom, nothing like the fantasy, nothing like anything worth remembering. 300 miles north, in Huntsville's death row, a different story was unfolding at the same time. A woman convicted of murder had already decided she wouldn't eat. Not because she couldn't request what she wanted. Not because of budget limits or approval processes. She simply refused to participate in the ritual. When the form arrived at her cell, she handed it back blank. The guards tried 3 times to make her fill it out. Policy required an attempt at compliance. She never touched the pen. Her refusal echoed something that happened in Texas years before that changed the entire system. A man named Lawrence Russell Brewer ordered an enormous meal in 2011. Steak, fried chicken, pizza, ice cream, pound cake, 3 root beers. The kitchen prepared everything. The cost exceeded normal limits, but the request was approved. When the food arrived, he looked at it and refused to take a single bite. Not out of protest. Not out of fear. He simply changed his mind. That meal sat untouched for hours while prison officials watched thousands of dollars of food go to waste. Texas responded by eliminating special last meal requests entirely. From that day forward, condemned inmates ate whatever was being served in the general prison population on their execution day. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, whatever happened to be on the rotating menu. No choices. No requests. No illusion of control. Other states watched and considered following suit. Some did. Others maintained their policies but tightened restrictions until the difference became meaningless. The psychology behind last meal requests fascinates researchers who study death row. Comfort food dominates the choices. Burgers, fried chicken, pizza, mac and cheese. Foods connected to childhood, to normalcy, to moments before everything went wrong. A man in Oklahoma once requested a single black olive with the pit still in it. Prison officials spent hours trying to understand the symbolism. Was it religious? Political? A final act of minimalism? He never explained. The olive arrived. He ate it slowly. 3 hours later he was dead. Another man in Georgia asked for nothing but asked that his allocated meal budget be donated to a homeless person in Atlanta. The request was denied. Policy didn't allow for monetary transfers or charitable redirections. He could eat or not eat, but the money stayed within the system. He chose not to eat. His execution proceeded on schedule. The budget allocation disappeared back into the department's general fund. The man in that Texas cell finally received his approved meal 6 hours before his scheduled execution. A guard slid the tray through the slot. Cheeseburger. Fries, now cold. A can of Coke. Small container of apple pie. He sat on his bunk and looked at it. This was the moment movies dramatized. The condemned man's final earthly pleasure. The last taste of freedom. But sitting there in that cell, looking at food identical to what he might have grabbed at any highway rest stop years ago, he felt nothing close to what the scripts promised. He unwrapped the burger. Took a bite. It tasted exactly like it looked. Institutional. Forgettable. The fries were soggy. The Coke was warm. The pie was the same brand the commissary sold, the same pie he could have bought any other day if he'd had money in his account. There was no transcendence. No culinary revelation. No moment where taste and memory collided to create meaning. Just food. Just eating because the alternative was letting it go to waste. In that moment, he understood something the system had known all along. The last meal wasn't for him. It was for everyone else. For the guards who could tell themselves they'd offered dignity. For the public who could imagine mercy in a cheeseburger. For the process that needed rituals to function smoothly. The condemned man was simply playing his assigned role in a performance designed to make execution feel more civilized, more humane, more acceptable. Across death rows nationwide, this scene repeats with minor variations. Some eat everything. Some eat nothing. Some request elaborate meals they barely touch. Some choose childhood favorites and cry while eating them. Some make political statements with their choices. Some try to game the system, requesting expensive items to cost the state money. None of it changes what happens next. The tray gets removed. The clock keeps moving. The final walk begins. Research into last meals reveals patterns that tell larger stories about class, race, and access. White inmates request more expensive items. Black inmates more often choose Southern comfort foods. Latino inmates frequently request foods connected to cultural identity. The budget restrictions hit different groups differently. A lobster tail might fit in $40. A family recipe requiring specific ingredients might not. Even in this final moment, systemic inequalities persist, embedded in something as seemingly simple as a meal request. The man who started this story finished his burger 3 hours before midnight. He left the fries untouched, drank half the Coke, never opened the pie. A guard came to remove the tray and asked if he needed anything else. Water, bathroom access, phone call. The standard questions that preceded the standard procedures. He shook his head. There was nothing left to need. What Hollywood misses in every last meal scene is the silence that follows. The hours between eating and walking. The condemned sits alone with the taste still in their mouth, knowing those were the last flavors they'll ever experience. No dramatic music. No meaningful conversations through the bars. Just waiting. Just existing in the space between the symbolic meal and the very real ending. The warden arrived at 11:30. Behind him, the chaplain. Behind them, the execution team. The door opened. Words were spoken that had been spoken thousands of times before to thousands of condemned people. The man stood. The walk began. That cold cheeseburger, those soggy fries, that warm Coke, they were already fading from memory. In the final minutes, food becomes the least important thing. The ritual reveals itself as exactly what it always was. Theater. Ceremony. A way to mark the passage between life and death with something that feels human even when nothing about the process is. The last meal illusion persists because we need it to persist. We need to believe that even in the darkest corners of our justice system, there's room for mercy, for choice, for dignity. We need to imagine that a good meal can somehow balance the scales, can provide comfort, can mean something. But for the people actually sitting in those cells, staring at those trays, the truth is simpler and harder. It's just food. And then it's over. The ritual satisfies everyone except the person it's supposedly designed to serve. Texas continues to serve standard prison meals to condemned inmates on their execution days. Other states maintain their request systems with varying levels of restriction. Some have raised their budgets slightly. Others have lowered them. A few allow alcohol or tobacco under specific circumstances. Most don't. The variations don't matter. Whether you get to choose your meal or eat what everyone else eats, whether you spend $50 or $5, whether you order lobster or hamburgers, the outcome remains identical. The meal ends. The clock runs out. The illusion shatters. And what remains is just the cold reality of a system that has found countless small ways to make the ultimate punishment feel almost routine.